it all depends on you as well. When I did the mill, that was side to side
Hmm.
because I knew at a certain point it would hit the fence.
Mm.
So, I knew even when it was flying automated and it
Yeah.
got close to the fence, I still got the EBGBs like it was going to hit the fence, and I knew it wouldn't.
Yeah.
But instead of going up and down along the facade, it
Yeah.
was flying, backwards and forwards.
Mm.
When it got to that very end, I could see where it was and how close it was to the fence, and I knew that was its last point.
Last
It's
point. Yeah.
it's generally down to the operator.
Yeah. And you obviously you use the drone to mark the flight path, so you knew exactly where it's going to start.
No,
No.
no, I didn't do any of that. Of course I did. Yeah.
It's like what? I was
uh,
like, how do you like your map precision pointing is just beyond me. Like, how do you not use
no,
the drone
of
to?
course I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
I went out and marked the positions, knew exactly where I wanted the drone to be
Mhm.
at any one time in 3D space.
Yeah.
It's what you have to do if you
Yeah.
want to fly safely. If you want to be a
Yeah.
cowboy, go for it. But it's not going to get you any result. It's not going to get you good results,
Yeah.
and probably get a slap on the wrist for it at some point. Boom,
Hi,
recording.
Alex. How
Hello,
you, how you doing?
not bad. We're back again for
We
round
are
two.
back again for episode 2.
Round two. So this week's subject, which will also
Yeah.
be a podcast
Mm-hmm.
at some point, is facade inspections.
There we go.
The key considerations to facade inspections.
That's it.
So I'm putting the questions to you, not all of them, because you
Okay.
questioned me last week. So now I'm
Oh,
going to
really?
question you.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
no, I don't want to be under the gun.
apologies to our viewers of my disappearing ears. Something to do with my background. Right. So, why inspect a facade?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question.
Hmm.
To start with, right? I mean, why do we do what we do? I guess it really sort of like boils down to aging infrastructure, like world
Mm-hmm.
over. And facades are one of those things that hold up buildings structurally and can be quite difficult to inspect and quite easy to ignore over a long period of time. So
Yep.
um, and so, I mean, we've probably seen this with global disasters. Like I think there was the Miami building, the most recent one that was on a global scale that was heard of. I mean, in London, we've heard of the Grenfell incident.
Tragic. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's when those things happen, you kind of think what what could have been done to prevent it,
Mm.
and um, frequent inspections are one of those things which drones are enabling now, and and as you know, that it's just a lot cheaper to use a drone than to use any traditional methods.
Yeah. I mean, back in the day, kind of before drones, and still now to some respect, you know, scaffolding. I mean, to scaffold a building is expensive. It's very
Yeah.
expensive. You got, scaffolding option, cherry picker. Again, you're paying for their time for that cherry picker. Scaffolding, you're paying for someone to come and put that scaffolding up.
Yeah.
You're then paying for someone to come and inspect the building, take some photos, do whatever. And
Yeah.
then you got to pay again for, well, probably including the first payment, but still you've got to have someone come and take the scaffolding down.
Yeah.
Cherry picker, again, you've got to have the right amount of space for a cherry picker. They're not small in the
Yeah.
slightest bit. And then you've got the old favorite ropes.
Ropes. Yeah. When all
Roping it.
fails, go to rope.
If all fails, get your climbing gear out
Yeah. Yeah.
and abseil that building. So yeah,
Mm.
I mean, drones have definitely a huge advantage when it comes to inspecting facades.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. And I think when you lower the cost of inspection, you increase the frequency of inspection, and
That's
chances
right.
are you can find something before it's too late.
Yes, of course.
And so I think it's one of those things that the industry is now enabling people maintaining buildings to think about is, how do we do an inspection every few weeks or every few months, as opposed to every few years, which, as we know, can be too long a timeline, and incidents happen before and so I think I think the right analogy here is you can compare it to aviation, in some sense where in aviation, if issues happen, they don't happen often, but when they happen, they're pretty
They're big. They're
big.
big and disastrous nine
Yeah,
times out of 10.
yeah.
So you're right. You wouldn't not inspect an aircraft.
Yeah.
You would
You
just
can't
wouldn't do
fly
it.
without making sure you've got everything
Exactly.
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same in the drone industry. We are taught and told to inspect our aircraft, our drones from the word go.
Yeah.
Before every flight, make
Yeah.
sure make sure your props are up to a good standard.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want the same for an aircraft. Why would you want the same for a building?
Yeah.
People live in those, that not necessarily any building, but I mean high rises, for example. People live in those things. Those things come down. It's horrendous, absolutely
Yeah.
horrendous.
Yeah. So speaking of drones, I mean, if you had to do a facade inspection, what kind of drone? I mean, the first question that everyone thinks of is like, okay, I need to get a drone. What drone
Yeah,
do I get if I want to do a facade inspection?
I mean, I guess it all depends. For the corporate user, the larger companies, they can afford things like the M300, for example, which is a big old rig. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
I've flown the M300, and it's a monster.
Yeah.
Sounds like a monster, flies like a monster. Um, and it will do the job, but in some respects, it's not always the right tool for the job.
Mm.
In a large built up area, you might not want to fly the M300. It's a
It's
it's a
gonna
it's a tank.
Yeah, it's gonna turn too many eyeballs, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, initially, I mean, a smaller unit, the Mavic kind of world we're looking at.
Mm.
I mean, you could potentially survey a facade with a Mavic Mini, Mavic Mini 3.
Hmm.
It would be good enough.
Yeah.
But you'd be probably more looking at, Mavic 2 Pro,
Hmm.
Mavic 3.
Yeah.
You've got to have that ability to be able to capture the imagery, in good quality.
Yeah.
And both
Yes.
the 2 and the 3 will do that.
Yeah. I guess if you go towards the mini side, one of the issues is wind resistance. I
Yeah.
imagine, because the size is so small, it's practically a toy.
Yeah.
So you've got sub 250-gram drone, but it's just so small that wind might be an issue. Which, if you are doing high-rise buildings, potentially can be a challenge.
Yeah, you
Uh,
do get a lot of wind tunnel, which I
mhm,
have experienced in the past, where wind rushes between buildings and
mm,
it can sideswipe your drone. It's happened with Inspires in the
mm,
past, where we've been doing, it wasn't a facade inspection, it was a roof inspection,
mhm,
but it was a flat roof with a kind of wall behind it.
mm,
But off to the left was a large space for, I think obviously wind was coming through that space, and the drone was just never stable.
mm.
Not that the I1 was ever very stable in the
Yeah,
first.
the Inspire has some serious stability
It does.
questions.
The first one did.
Yeah.
The second one's not too
Mm,
bad.
mm,
So drones wise, I would be looking at the for someone starting out, or even just those, even for regular inspection, the
mhm.
Inspire the Mavic series,
Does the
Mavic 2,
job.
Mavic 3 will do the job.
Yeah.
I mean, we've done it.
Yeah.
We've done it on test runs with the
Yeah.
Mavic 2,
Yeah,
and
definitely a lot of our test flights with Mavic 2s have been pretty good. I mean, the building that you did recently for a test flight, the mill, it was quite, yeah, I mean, how was your experience with the Mavic 2? Were you able to safely and in a quality way get the data,
yeah, I
or?
mean, it was solid. It didn't falter.
Mhm,
Um, it's a nice small aircraft. It's obviously not too small, but it's small enough to be able to judge a distance in regards to, obviously I was photographing the facade,
Mhm.
but behind the drone was a large warehousey looking building.
Right.
And to be able to photograph the facade in an automated fashion, obviously
Mhm.
I didn't want to hit the building behind me.
Mm.
And the Mavic 2 is small enough to be able to judge that distance quite nicely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Mavic 2 or Mavic 3,
Yeah.
great bit of kit.
But hasn't Mavic 3 recently had like GPS issues? I mean, there's been some reports of.
I think initially when it
Mhm.
first came out,
Mhm.
don't quote me on this because I'll have DJI knocking at my door.
Yeah. Same
It
air, like yeah.
yeah, shh, we won't
No.
say anymore. I think it did.
Mhm.
I know of operators that had
Mhm.
GPS issues with
Mhm.
the Mavic 3. I think that's been ironed out now. I'm
Right.
pretty sure that's been ironed out.
With respect to facade inspections, though, I mean, GPS is quite an important thing, right? I mean, I mean, at the end of the day, buildings block GPS signals.
That they do.
So, I mean, how do you reconcile that? How do you then kind of build your operation so that, you, whether
I
or
mean,
not.
your best option really is to, as long as you've got enough satellites when you take off, you've got no
Mhm.
GPS issues, no mag interference, which can
Yeah.
also cause, a massive amount of grief.
Hmm.
Typically 15 or more
Hmm.
GPS satellites
Yeah.
attached to your app.
Yeah.
Um, so a good indicator of strong GPS.
Yeah.
Make sure you've got that strong GPS before you take off.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't want to be messing around with 4 or 5 satellites while you're trying to do a facade because
Yeah.
your drone's gonna do the off,
Yeah. If you're trying
basically.
to control the drone as you're trying to plan your mission, which is just a no-no. It's
Yeah,
just too many variables at play,
yeah,
especially in a
exactly.
built-up area.
Pre planning, especially in a built up area. I mean, there's so much pre planning that goes into consideration before you even get before you even get on site, let
Yeah.
alone when you get there.
Yeah.
So yeah, a good strong GPS signal.
Yeah.
And obviously, make sure there's no obstacles.
Yeah.
You take off from a nice clean patch of ground.
Yeah.
You don't want, you know, foliage or anything in the way. You want
Yeah.
to make sure your line of sight to the facade or the inspection is clear.
Mm.
While it's, assess the facade before you do it.
Yeah.
With the mill, for example,
Hmm.
obviously I did the facade, but at the very end of the building was a
Hmm.
12-foot fence covered in barbed wire.
All right.
So the last thing you want to do is go, yeah, that's cool. I can, my top height's, I don't know, let's say 70 feet, and I can go as low as 5 feet. Well, actually,
Mm.
I couldn't. I could go as low as 14 feet. Any
Mm.
lower than that, and I'd have bounced off a barbed wire fence.
Yeah. And
So
yeah.
it's pre-planning. It's
Yeah.
pre-plan your mission, and when
Mm.
you're there, you know, double check, double triple check that
Yeah.
your flight is going to be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I've seen operators do quite often if they're doing facades or low GPS areas, take off the drone first, take it as high as possible,
Hmm.
acquire more GPS satellites, then start your mission. Just basically give the drone some breathing room to some sort of time to be able
Yeah,
to actually get the GPS signal. And I think especially in those operations, as you said, pre-planning, having enough time, having thought things out, as opposed to just rocking up and starting the job. I
I
think.
mean, with the mill, I got on site and I did actually take the drone up. I took the drone
Mm.
up to calculate my top height and my bottom height.
Hmm.
Obviously, I had to find out how high that fence was. I couldn't judge it from standing next to it.
Mm.
So I literally hovered the drone above the fence.
Yeah.
I had to figure out how far away the warehouse was so I
Hmm.
could get my distances right. It's all in the planning. All in the
Yeah.
planning.
Yeah. So that's interesting, right? I mean, so in that sense, what you did is getting to the site, you first flew the drone manually,
Yes.
to understand your distances, to
Yep.
understand your altitudes,
That's correct.
and then you started the automation using Hammer, which is kind of interesting because it's one of those like facade missions is one of those things where you can go both ways. You can fly the whole mission automated, or you could fly it manual.
Yeah.
Um, but and people get hung up on the automation. At the end of the day, the automation is just a way to collect high quality data.
People do have the fear of automation, and I'll put my hands up.
Mhm.
I I was not a big fan of automation for a long time, and didn't use it. And now, it's just, it makes your life so much easier. But
Mhm.
you've got that caveat of you have to make sure everything's in place
Yeah.
before that drone takes off.
Yeah. And you still got to be
Because
vigilant. You can't just,
exactly, you can't just, hey, there it goes, put the
yeah.
controller on the floor,
Yeah.
have my can of Coke,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
which I've got here.
Right there.
Yeah, right here.
You're not flying drones at the moment, are you?
No, I'm not. No, no,
There's no drone
no,
hovering around
no.
capturing this
I'm not inspecting my house while I'm on the call.
on a podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, vigilant.
Mhm.
Keep your controller in your hand.
Mhm.
Watch the aircraft. Find out what it's doing. To be honest, as a rule of thumb, usually when the mission's finished,
Mhm.
obviously it can return to home by itself.
Mhm.
I'll fly it back in manually.
Right.
I always fly a drone back in manually
Yeah.
because I know where it's going to land. I
Yeah.
know how high I can take it and bring it back in.
Yeah.
Not saying obviously you can't, you can't automatically send it to home, which you can. But yeah, I will fly it back in manually.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I'm a flight freak as well. I like to fly. So
Yeah, usually you want to, if you're doing a facade, it's never going to be like 300 meters away. It's going to be quite close to you.
yeah,
So it just makes sense for you to be able to see the drone, bring it back home,
yeah,
as opposed to if you're doing something that is like a site, and you want to do a map of a site where the drone's
yeah,
so far away, and maybe at that point you want to bring it back home at least half the distance,
yeah, of course.
as opposed to just flying it back, 300 meters.
Yeah,
Um, so that's one of the interesting considerations. I think the point about automation, one of the ways to think about it was also like, you I think of it like a stencil.
yeah,
Like, you can draw freehand and you can do a great job. There's people who do this and there's no problem with that, but you could take the help of tools to draw better. And, that's completely okay too, as long as the end result is where you want to be and where your customer
yeah,
wants you to be, or
yeah,
the
totally,
stakeholder.
totally.
So,
I mean, automation is definitely the future of capture for things like mapping, photogrammetry, facade capture. It makes the operator's life so much easier. And as long as everything's in place and has been planned correctly, the data you're going to capture is, you know, it's going to be fantastic data.
yeah, yeah,
High quality data. Back to high quality data. You see,
yeah.
our
That
last
was
podcast. That was
it's
last. That
exactly
was
that's
that
what
was last
this
week.
was last week. Yeah, but that is the theme. That is what we are aiming for, isn't it?
Exactly, and that's what we
Um,
do at Hammer. We enable operators to capture high quality data.
yeah,
Doesn't matter what you're doing, whether it's facade or whatever.
yeah. So when it comes to high quality, I guess for a facade mission, especially if it's an inspection one, I think one of the things I've seen a lot is people really care the quality of every individual image,
Yes.
whether it's in focus, whether it's got the right details, because it's not, you're not. Most people typically don't try and process a facade, even though you could. Most people are interested in the details for every single
Yeah,
image.
certain aspects of the facade that they will want to see in high detail.
Yeah,
Um, Obviously, you're going to want that camera in focus.
yeah,
You don't want to go. You don't want to go from one shot, one portion of the facade to the next, and one be in focus and one not.
yeah,
Um, it's paramount to see all the details.
yeah. And you typically have like lower overlaps in facade missions,
Yep.
especially if you're not trying to do photogrammetry. So, which means that, if you've got an image and you've got two other images right next to it, and there's very little overlap, and that one image doesn't have the detail you wanted, and you were looking for a crack that actually you can see in that image, but it's out of focus. Oh, that's just, it's one of those. You have that feeling of like, oh, I wish
I've got to go. I've got to go back and do it again.
to the site,
which you don't want to do.
which you really don't want to do.
So I guess an important tip is to focus before every shot.
Yeah, if you can.
If you have the ability to focus the camera before each shot, then it's worth doing. Last thing you want to do is go back and go, I missed shot 43 out of 400.
Yeah,
Which bit of the facade was that?
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, focus your camera.
Yeah, especially
Um,
when travel to the site is such a big cost, compared to the actual flying of the drone. Sometimes traveling to the site can be longer, right? The
yeah,
operation itself is like
yeah. I
maybe
mean,
half an
yeah,
hour.
I'm lucky with my test site as it's not that far away. But
Mm,
if I was to go and do a site that was say 200 miles away, and you get back and a percentage of those shots are out of focus, what are you going to
yeah,
tell your client?
yeah,
Sorry, I've got to go back.
yeah,
I've got X% of your shots, but some of them weren't in focus.
yeah.
It's not going to go down well, and you're going to lose the business.
Yeah, yeah. It's same for a stakeholder as well. Time is money in being a team at an enterprise, and you just don't want to
You don't
repeat fire the mission if you don't
you
need to.
don't want to have to send your team back out.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
that's
It's just
sackable.
yeah.
Be gone. We'll find someone else to do the job instead.
It's like, why does the droid not do this already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
actually, that's where Hammer comes in because we
yeah,
do have a focus feature.
yeah. I mean, we enable. I mean, it still has to be turned on. Someone has to sort of
Well,
like,
yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah. You still
yeah,
have to have the ability to be able to turn it on.
yeah. But yeah, it was happening a lot. So the focus before pictures feature just allows you to stop the drone, focus the image, take the picture. And we had to actually like work with some of the DJI teams to be able to implement this properly, because their SDK doesn't really allow focusing images as easily as you would want it to be, which is a whole different conversation. We should probably do a pod on
Oh,
just DJI integrations.
we'll do that. We'll do that.
Yeah.
Maybe you could do that with one of the devs. I
Yeah.
might get a bit lost on that one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
But
I'll get someone.
we'll get one of the devs in while we're both
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
and
We should get one of the engineers to actually come in and talk
they
about.
can do some mind blowing stuff that I
Yeah,
won't know anything about.
it'll be a massive rant. Um,
3 hour podcast
yeah,
on DJI SDK.
um, yeah. It's good overall. Like overall, it's a really solid piece of SDK, and I think from an engineering standpoint, it's just that you always want more. You always want
Of
to have things work a
course.
certain way. So, um, what about distances? So facades, I'm talking about DJI and DJI SDK. So I
Mm.
know that from some of their documentation, they claim that, with these drones, some of their drones, you shouldn't get closer than 10 meters to surfaces. Um, how do you think about how close?
And obviously some drones have obstacle avoidance. Most of the newer ones will have obstacle avoidance. Do you turn that off? Do you turn it on? Do you leave it on?
Yeah,
What do you do with it?
yeah,
I mean, obviously, obstacle avoidance is great. Um, it all depends on your camera as well. If you're flying an M300 with it's this just an example,
hmm
with like a P1 or a phase one with a
hmm
huge megapixel range,
hmm
you can afford to be further away from your asset.
yeah,
Whether that's safer or not, who knows? Because you might be in a built-up area.
yeah,
But say let's take the mill for example, because it's one we've concentrated on, and we've obviously got lots of data regarding the mill. I could have shot one of the sides of the mill with a phase one camera from probably a good 100 feet away
right.
easily, and
Mm.
still had
Detail.
really good detail and quality.
Mm.
But obviously with the smaller rigs, you've got a 20 megapixel camera, 1 inch sensor on the Mavic 2, for example.
hmm
Um, distances, eh, above all else, it's about safety.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, you've got to be safe. I mean, the Miller side, because the mill's in the middle of nowhere. There's no one around, and if they are,
hmm
they usually come and say hello. But
hmm
if you're in a built-up area, say Brighton or London, you're going to want to make sure you're at a safe distance from that building.
yeah,
And that safety is paramount when
yeah.
flying drones.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it also depends on your skill level and whether you want to
Mm,
take the job sort of, what's the word, manually versus automated.
yep.
And so sometimes I've heard people, they would do like 5 meters from the surface, but to be able to do that effectively, they have to turn off the obstacle avoidance on the drone, because it can interfere.
Yeah.
It's a pretty bold decision to do that because, you're just saying, well, actually, I'm the pilot here, and I take responsibility for every action that the drone does, and therefore switch off the
Yeah, I
obstacle
mean,
avoidance.
you can set your obstacle avoidance to alert and stop at
Mm.
different distances. But at 5 meters and you leave it on, it's not going to go anywhere. It's
Yeah.
going to be bleeping away like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially the Mavic 2, I think, has over the Mavic 1, I think there's just a lot more obstacle avoidance sensors. And I think the same thing is probably true for the M3 for the Mavic 3 as well. And I think just DJI's continuous line of drones that are coming in is just
and the
so
Mavic
many.
3, Mavic 3 Mini as well. That's
Mini.
that's got a huge set of sensors up the front. And, you've got the whole, should you fly down one side first, not the other side? When it comes to the facade side of things, I guess it all depends on the size of the building.
Yeah.
Is it taller than it's wide or wider than it's tall?
Yeah.
There's all that sort of stuff to consider.
Yeah, if you're in New York, you're probably always flying up and down, right, as opposed to left and right. It's just buildings are so tall.
Yeah. I mean, you want to maximize your coverage.
Yeah.
Basically, in the quickest, safest time possible.
Yeah.
The last thing you want to be doing is, 2 hours later, you're still on the same facade. Unless, of course, it's a ginormous building and it is going to take you a lot longer.
Yeah.
It's about optimization.
Yeah. And sometimes you can't go, even though the optimal flight path might be up and down, sometimes maybe you can't go up and down that easily just because of obstacles, vegetation around, sometimes left and right is you feel a lot more safe as well as the drone comes down comes down only once as opposed to coming down multiple times.
It all depends on you as well. When I did the mill, that was side to side because I knew at a certain point it would hit the fence. So, I knew even when it was flying automated and it got close to the fence, I still got the EBGBs like it was going to hit the fence and I knew it wouldn't. But instead of going up and down along the facade, it was flying, backwards and forwards. When it got to that very end, I could see where it was and how close it was to the fence. And I knew that was its last point. It's generally down to the operator.
Yeah. And you use the drone to mark the flight path, so you knew exactly where it's going to start.
No, I didn't do any of that. Of course I did. Yeah.
It's like, what? I was like, how do you your map precision pointing is just beyond me. Like, how do you not use the drone?
Of course I did. Yeah. I went out and marked the positions, knew exactly where I wanted the drone to be at any one time in 3D space. It's what you have to do if you want to fly safely. If you want to be a cowboy, go for it. But it's not going to get you any result. It's not going to get you good results.
Yeah.
And probably get a slap on the wrist for it at some point.
Yeah, or a lost drone,
drone.
Yeah.
Who wants to lose a couple of grand? Not me.
Not me either.
No one.
Okay. And assuming you do your operation really well, so you've got your great data sets. I guess one of the things that comes up in facade missions is at the end of the day, it's a 3D mission. The facade is, it's a vertical structure.
Yeah.
So how do you then visualize and present the data to the stakeholder so that they can make meaningful decisions out of it? Because obviously if you just provide a stack of photos and then those photos have like, I don't know, there's a window on 3rd floor and a window on 1st floor that look exactly the same. I mean, it's just
you can visualize. It's one of those you can either ortho it, so you can have one complete photo of the whole of the facade, or render it into 3D.
Yeah.
If it's in 3D space, you can manipulate that image and move it around and zoom in on it, find out which window it is, annotate it if you want, which is something else obviously we do. Your best option probably is to 3D render it.
Yeah.
You've got your images. With your 3D software, you should know which image refers to which part of your render.
Yeah.
So you can go, okay, well, there's that window with a rusty hinge on it or a plant growing out of it. That one refers to this photo here. So I can zoom in on that photo. I can annotate that photo and say, hey, look, there's a plant growing out of this window, or the handles are rusty, or whatever. Definitely having a 3D image
of
your facade is the best option.
Yeah. And by 3D, it doesn't always have to be processed, I suppose, because like, I mean, all that information is embedded in the
Of
photos anyway, right? So you've got every
course.
single photo with the right altitude information. So if the drone was at 50 meters or 150 feet,
Yeah,
and then it was at 40 meters or 120 feet, you know that those were taken at two different altitudes.
they're all
And so
geotagged.
they're all geotagged.
Yeah, all the information is there for you to examine and tear apart if you need to.
Yeah. And to present
Basically.
and to present it in that way, right? Like, you don't want to if you go and capture a facade, you don't want to come back with a set of 2D images and sort of say, well, here's the facade, but it's actually a vertical structure in these images.
Yeah.
So
Here's a boatload of photos.
yeah,
Sort through them like a jigsaw. Try and put it
yeah,
together yourself. Yeah, it's
yeah,
you need that information to quantify where certain parts of that facade are.
exactly, yeah.
Because you're right, even with the mill, I'm coming back to the mill again.
Hmm.
There are, even on the mill, there's windows that look the same. I mean,
Yeah,
that building's a wreck.
yeah,
But even it being a wreck, there are windows that look the same, and you couldn't say, well, that was on the left-hand side, 3 stories up, because
yeah,
just looking at a photo, you wouldn't know that.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's very hard for, I think, even though I think as we're very spatially minded, like us as people, we're very
Hmm.
spatially minded. We know once we see something, we can remember where it was. But if it was like something vertical that we suddenly has been made flat and you just have to just put it into your head without any context, it's very hard.
You have to kind of
So
justify where it is or where it was, and yeah, so having it laid out for you,
mm,
in 3D,
yeah,
or an ortho is
yeah,
the best choice, I
yeah.
think.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm quite curious about is maybe we're going to start seeing an interplay of 3D models and facade inspections in the same projects.
Yeah.
So I think that at the moment maybe they're conducted as separate sort of projects, but maybe we're going to start seeing, oh, okay, but let's capture a 3D model of a building, and then let's capture the facade, and then
Interweave the two.
interweave the two
gi-
into one consistent picture.
yeah, gives you a full 3D render of
Yeah.
your building or your structure or your tower or whatever you're capturing.
Yeah. You can do
Yeah.
multiple facades that way, it
Yeah.
just doesn't have to be one facade. You've got the whole building now.
Yep.
And this is a challenge with Google Earth, right? Like Google Earth has some buildings in 3D, but not everything is in 3D on Google Earth. And the quality is sometimes so low, you can't actually use it in any
No.
meaningful way. So
No. I mean, obviously, the nearer to London or the big cities you get, you can certainly zoom in and have a look.
mhm.
Their 3D structuring there is, but I mean, come out my way into the
Yeah.
sticks, into the middle of nowhere. There's Google Earth. There's nothing 3D out here. When you turn it to 3D, it's just flat.
Yeah.
So having the ability to, you know, capture your facade, capture your 3D map,
Mhm.
put those two together and create a full 3D render of a building.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great for inspection purposes as well.
Yeah.
You've got the whole structure there to look at all in one hit.
Yeah. And you do that multiple times over the year, and suddenly, you've got 4D inspections going
Yeah,
on.
you start building
Yeah.
yourself
Yeah.
an absolute monster of a render. Monster of
Yeah.
a render.
Monster of a render. That's
Sounds
another
like
book title.
I was going to say, it does sound like
Yeah.
a book or maybe an album. Monster of a render. Yeah,
Yeah, it's probably more of an album.
yeah. Heavy
Um,
metal album, I reckon.
yeah, you need some of that playing whilst you do a facade inspection.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Power it out.
yeah, so that's cool. I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, I think we're in that point in the industry where you can do these inspections, and you can do them repeatedly, low cost,
Hmm.
and you can, and I think it's somewhat the pathway towards predictive maintenance, where maybe we know the issues before they happen, as opposed to, oh no, there's an issue on the building, you've got to fix it. It's more like
Yeah,
that
I mean,
crack's grown.
it goes back to automation, doesn't it? Automation and time management. You do the same mission once a month or once every 3 months, and you can see how your structure has changed.
Yeah.
You know, the mill, for example. Yeah, back to the mill. I do love that place.
We're going to have to show people this picture of this mill
I
because you
know, no,
mentioned
we
it
are.
so many
Yeah,
times.
we're gonna have to put it up like here
Yeah,
somewhere.
it's going to be on the
Bing!
video somewhere.
You know, I could go back and do that every month,
Mhm.
and we could examine that data, and guaranteed every month something would be different.
Yeah,
You
100%.
know, if you 3D rendered the whole lot month on month, you would notice differences in that building as it deteriorates, which is really sad because
Yeah.
it is a great building.
Yeah.
But even better is that we get to use it as our test ground.
Awesome. So this was great. I think we touched upon quite a few things. Everything
We did
from
indeed.
capture to flight to processing to
Yeah.
sharing the data to understanding all the operational challenges.
And we didn't only just speak about Facade. We kind of moved it on to, you know, advances beyond the facade. Oh, that's a book.
There we go.
Beyond the Facade. Got it.
Alex, I think you need an alternative
I do.
career.
I do. I'm going to start writing
titles.
books beyond the facade. Where was I going with that? Yeah. So, you know, we kind of went to kind of where future operations could go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They will definitely go towards that. It's going to be interesting, you know. It's going to be an interesting time in technology where you have some of these AI systems running in the cloud telling us where our buildings are going to break. So do something about it before they do.
While we sit around watching telly.
Yeah.
Other people, you know, the AI can do it for us.
Or a can of Coke.
All right.
There we go. And on that note, brilliant.
So there you go. Well, listen, you know, if you like our video again, give us a like down here somewhere again. Got any comments? Drop us some comments, and you can always get hold of us on team@hammermissions.com. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure.
Nice
Thanks so much.
Cheers, Varun.
Cheers, Alex. Catch you later.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.